Yo, welcome back to another video. Now, as you can see, we are going to be talking about the new familiars that came into update 5.5 alongside the new raid in anime Vanguards. These two familiars are really meta defining and very insane. So let's get straight into both of these familiars. Unlike the previous familiars, I will be talking a bit more in depth about these familiars and their potentials, as they are definitely a lot different to most familiars that we've had in the game. So the first familiar that we will be looking at is Black Spirit, just like a black little cloud with some red eyes. I don't know what anime this is from, so if you happen to know, please put it down in the comment section so I actually know myself. But you can only view this familiar if you have visual effects enabled, which is kind of funny. But yeah, let's go ahead and check out its passives. So its first passive is that Darkness consumes. Any attack that would generate meter generates 88.7% more meter. Now this can roll between 0.1 and 100% more meter. The second passive, Dark Spirit, this can either roll Blast, Spark, or Nature Element and can roll between 2 and 5% damage. Alright, so let's talk about this Black Spirit. This is a very good unit for any unit with meters, as you can obviously tell with the passive. These units that have meters that are currently in the game are Goku/Vegeta that turn into Vegito, Sid, Virgil, and Dante. Okay, so let's start off with Goku and his breakpoints. Goku has a base meter gain of 25%, requiring 4 attacks to be able to swap. Getting a minimum roll of 33.4% lowers this to 3 attacks, and getting a minimum roll of 100% lowers this to 2 attacks. This essentially halves the amount of time it takes for Goku to swap into Vegeta, and then that also halves the amount of time being able to transform into Vegeta, which helps with the biggest issue people have with this unit, and that being how long it takes to be able to transform into Vegeta. So this is a very good familiar for Goku. Next we'll be looking at Sid and his recommended breakpoints. Sid has a base meter gain of 12.5%, requiring 8 attacks to swap. Getting a minimum roll of 60% lowers this to 5 attacks, and getting a minimum roll of 100% lowers this to 4 attacks. These are pretty good, as this is a different playstyle you can play with Sid, allowing you to have auto swap on and play around his swapping effects instead of kind of building up either Sid or John Smith. It is a new playstyle that you can unlock with having a good rolled familiar. I don't know how well it performs, but I definitely will be trying it out myself. Next we will be looking at Dante and his recommended breakpoints. Dante has a base meter gain of 20%, requiring 5 attacks to transform. Getting a minimum roll of 25% lowers this to 4 attacks, and getting a minimum roll of 66.7% lowers this to 3 attacks. Now it is possible to lower this to 2 attacks, but this requires a 150% roll, which is very impossible to get. This requires a perfectly rolled familiar to then perfectly hit a corruption 3, so that is pretty much impossible to get. Plus I would not recommend this familiar for Dante. I would prefer to use a crit familiar on Dante than this familiar, because he benefits a lot more from crit, and he also gains his transformation fairly easily with being able to crit a lot, so that is what I'd recommend. And lastly, we will be looking at Virgil and his recommended breakpoints. Virgil has a base meter gain of 10%, requiring 10 attacks to transform. Getting a minimum roll of 66.7% lowers this to 6 attacks, and getting a minimum roll of 100% lowers this to 5 attacks. Now it is possible to lower this to 4 attacks, but this also requires a 150% roll, just like Dante, which is not recommended because it is pretty impossible to hit. Now this familiar, I would say, is the best familiar for Virgil, as his biggest problem that he has is his build up to actually be able to do all his damage, which is based around his devil trigger. So this eliminates the downside, or mostly eliminates it, making this a really good familiar to use for him. Next up we have Birb. This is a pretty good familiar, as it is kind of like a Gambler's Paradise familiar. It is, I believe, a Rob Lucci's little bird, pet bird that he has. So it is a very cool model, sits on the shoulder. Anyway, let's go and look at this familiar's passives. So we have Ventriloquist, changes damage by -17.5%, changes crit damage by 23.6%, changes range by 6%, changes critical chance by -7.6%. This is kind of of weird, but you'll see what I mean. So ventriloquist, it has 4 different rolls it can do. Damage can either roll between positive and minus 20%. Critical damage can either roll between positive and minus 30% damage. Range can either roll between positive and minus 20%. Critical chance can roll between positive and minus 20%. Hit bird can either roll spark, water, or blast element type and can roll between 2 and 5% damage. Overall, Birb is a very good familiar for anyone to use. You can get good stats overall, a wide range of stats. Some might be negative, but if you have really good positive stats that outweigh the negatives, I definitely would recommend using this on any unit. Now, let's get down into breaking numbers and how ridiculously rare this bird is to roll amazing stats. One thing to note about these tables and stats that I will be talking about now, this was helped through using AI because I did not want to go through and calculate everything myself, as that would take very long, but I made sure to set certain variables and have certain things consistent to try and make it very similar to what we have for the odds in game. They might not be the exact same odds we do have in game, but this is to give you a greater visual on how each and how rare the rolls can be. So we have 3 rolls that are 20%. This goes from minus 20 to positive 20 with an increment of 0.1% between each value, meaning that there are a total of 401 possible values to roll between. For the 30%, this can roll between minus 30 and positive 30%, with it also having a 0.1% increments, meaning that there are a total of 601 possible values to roll between. Now that we have the base possible values to roll between, let's get into a table to look at. Okay, so we are going to be looking at a table kind of showing what it is like when you're trying to look for specific stats. Now, I am excluding the one roll that can go between minus 30 and 30% because that makes it a lot harder to be able to display and show a table. So we are just ignoring that singular stat and acting as if this can roll only 3 stats that go between minus 20 and 20%. This is just an example to give you an idea of how rare these stats are. These are not the real proper percentages because we are completely excluding one stat here. If I'm looking for one specific stat, let's take attack for example. I'm wanting this to be at least 5% increased damage or higher. I don't care if it's only 5% or it goes up to 10%. This is a 37% chance of that happening. Now, if I'm wanting it, so the minimum roll I want is at least a 10% increase. This goes to 25%. If I'm wanting it to be only 19% or higher, this is a 2.7% chance of happening. And then if I'm wanting it to be perfect, this is a 0.25% chance of happening. That is if I'm looking for a specific stat to be that value. Now, the chance of wanting it so you don't care which of the 3 stats have that certain value, it's a 44% chance for it to be at least 5%. For it to be at least 10%, it is a 42%. For any of the 3 stats to at least be 19% increase, it is a 7% chance. And for at least one of the 3 stats to be a minimum of 20% increased, it is a 0.7% chance of happening. But as you can see, as you start to add more numbers that you want to be a minimum roll of, it gets way harder to roll. If I'm wanting 2 of my 3 stats to be at least 19% increased, it is a 0.2% chance of happening. This is double the chance of a monarch. Now, if I'm wanting to roll all 3 of my stats at least 19% increased, then it is a 0.002% chance of happening. This is 50 times rarer than rolling a monarch in game. That just gives you a perspective on how rare this is. If I'm wanting all 3 of these stats to be exactly 20%, this is a 0.00001% chance of happening. More like this is never happening in my life. So that's to give a quick example on just showing you the rarity when you're trying to add so many different values and trying to get them to specific roles. Now we will look at just random rolls and the chances of those rolls happening. If you thought this was extremely rare to get 3 stats to a perfect 20% roll, being a 1 in 64 million chance, then you'll have a big reality check when you find out to get perfect 20/30/20/20 roll is a 1 in 38.7 billion chance of happening. This is extremely rare, never ever gonna happen. I don't think anyone in the server will ever get anywhere near this number to be able to reach it. It is an impossible number to get, but if you ever do get it, then probably the luckiest person in the world. Okay, so looking at some examples of random rolls, I had ChatGPT randomly simulate rolling this familiar, and I have 3 examples up on screen right now. So looking at the first example we have 2 bad stats and 2 good stats. This, to be able to roll something similar to this or better, this is looking at a 5% chance of happening. This is because we have 2 pretty terrible stats, while the other ones, we do have 1 high stat, but it can go higher because it is the critical damage. This one can roll up to 30%, so this is technically like more or less a mid roll. So the second one, I rolled this one insanely crazy. We got a 19.9% chance for critical chance. This is what makes this so ridiculously low to hit, even though we have a minus 18% critical damage. If we are trying to get anything better than this, we are still trying to keep 19.9% crit chance here. So if we want to get minus 17% crit damage instead of minus 18, to have this be the same or better, this still needs to have the 19.9% crit chance, making it such a ridiculously low percent chance to roll something as crazy as this. And for the last example, this one is a very good one, but it is still pretty rare. We have 3 positive stats, not too good on the damage, but everything else is really good. The crit chance is really good, the crit damage is really good, and the range, honestly, I would take a familiar like this. This is a very good familiar. This is a 0.29 or 0.3% chance of happening. And finally, let's end things off by looking at a real example from in-game. We have a familiar that has really good stats. Now this is gone even further, and this is a C3 corruption, so there has been an increase. Through me figuring out, I believe that this has been increased by 13%, and the original stats that this had was -3 damage, plus 12% crit damage, plus 8% range, and plus 18.8% crit chance. This is an insane roll. The chances for the roll alone without the corruption 3 is a 0.039% chance or a 0.04% chance, which is a very low roll. It's about a 1 in 2,537 chance for you to get this pet. But wait, there is more. The chance to hit this roll and then hit a C3 with exactly 13% boost is a 0.00078% chance of happening. Or probably the better way to find out the chance of this happening is hitting a C3 and getting a 13% or higher boost is a 0.029% chance of happening. And with that, we have come towards the end of this video. Now, I'd just like to make another note saying these are not the exact stats we have in game for these rolls on the Birb especially. This is just an example. I may be incorrect, but I was just trying to give an example of how rare this bird can be to get perfect stats on. But yeah, other than that, I commend any of those people who have made it this far through the video listening to me talk about numbers. So yeah, I appreciate it if you have watched this far through the video. See ya.